So imagine you're a German soldier stationed in occupied Norway in 1941. You're guarding a coastal installation that's supposed to be absolutely secure. Naval patrols, guard towers, minefields, machine gun nests. The whole setup. It's 2 a.m, freezing cold. You're on watch, but honestly, you're half asleep because nobody's attacked this position in months. Then suddenly, you hear nothing. No alarms, no explosions, no gunfire, just silence. You turn around, and the guard post behind you is empty. Your entire squad, just gone, like they vanished into thin air. You grab your rifle, start to shout for backup, and that's when you feel the knife against your throat. A voice whispers in your ear, in perfect German, "Make a sound and you're dead." You freeze. The knife disappears. And when you finally work up the courage to turn around, there's nobody there. But in the morning, you discover that the entire installation has been sabotaged. Fuel dumps destroyed, communications cut, equipment ruined, and 6 of your officers are just gone, vanished. Until you realise the people who just ghost walked through your impenetrable defences weren't some elite special forces with years of training. They were British Commandos, and they'd only existed as a unit for 8 months. But before we get into this absolutely legendary story, if you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what historical figure you want me to cover next. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and I read every single one. Now, let's get into it. June 1940. Britain was in serious trouble. France had fallen. The British Army had barely escaped from Dunkirk. Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe, and Britain was standing alone, waiting for an invasion that everyone knew was coming. Winston Churchill looked at this situation and made a decision that seemed completely insane. Instead of just defending, he wanted to attack. Not with massive armies. Britain didn't have those anymore, but with small, highly trained units that could strike German positions across occupied Europe and disappear before the Germans even knew what hit them. He called them Commandos, named after the Boer guerrilla fighters who'd given the British Army hell in South Africa decades earlier. The idea was revolutionary. Take volunteers from regular army units, put them through the most brutal training imaginable, then send them on raids that regular soldiers would consider suicide missions. Most military commanders thought Churchill was crazy. You don't win wars with small raiding parties. You win with tanks, artillery, and massive infantry formations. But Churchill didn't care about conventional wisdom. He wanted to hit back, to show the Germans they weren't safe anywhere, to prove that Britain was still in the fight. So they put out a call for volunteers. The requirements were simple. We are looking for men willing to undertake hazardous missions. That was it. No promises, no guarantees, just a warning that you'd probably die. Thousands of men volunteered. They took the best, the toughest, the ones who were a little bit crazy, and they sent them to Scotland for training that would break most people. The Commando Training Centre at Achnacarry Castle was hell on earth. The instructors were Scottish Highland veterans who didn't believe in coddling soldiers. 20-mile speed marches over mountains carrying full combat load. Night navigation through terrain so rough you could break a leg just walking. Live fire exercises where instructors would deliberately shoot close enough that you could feel the rounds passing by. If you hesitated, you failed. If you complained, you failed. If you couldn't keep up, you were sent back to your regular unit. About 40% of volunteers washed out. The ones who made it through became something entirely different from regular soldiers. They learned to move silently, to kill silently, to navigate by stars, to survive in extreme conditions, to think independently when plans fell apart. But most importantly, they learned one core principle: improvise, adapt, and complete the mission no matter what. And here's where British commandos became something the Germans had never encountered before. Traditional military units follow doctrine. They have set procedures, standard tactics, predictable responses. Commandos threw all of that out. Every mission was different. Every approach was customized. They'd study their target obsessively, find the weakness nobody else saw, and exploit it in ways the Germans never expected. The first major raid was Operation Claymore in March 1941. Target: the Lofoten Islands in Norway. The Germans thought these islands were safe. They were remote, protected by Norwegian geography, lightly defended because who would attack such an isolated target? The Commandos hit them at dawn, 500 men in 12 ships. They destroyed fish oil factories the Germans were using to make explosives, captured German soldiers and Norwegian collaborators, sank ships in the harbour, and were gone before German reinforcements could arrive. Total commando casualties, 0. German facilities destroyed, millions of pounds worth. The Germans were stunned. How did the British get past their coastal defences? How did they coordinate such a complex operation so perfectly? And most terrifyingly, where would they strike next? That was the psychological warfare element. The Germans now had to defend thousands of miles of coastline against an enemy that could appear anywhere, anytime. But the raid that really made the Germans fear Commandos, Operation Archery, December 1941, target Vågsøy Island in Norway, German garrison, naval facilities and fish oil factories. This wasn't a sneak attack, this was a full-scale assault. 500 Commandos supported by naval bombardment and RAF air cover. The fighting was brutal, house-to-house combat. The Germans fought back hard, but the Commandos were relentless. They destroyed the garrison, sank 10 German ships, demolished 4 factories, and captured or killed over 150 German soldiers. But here's what made this raid legendary. During the fighting, a small commando team, detached from the main force, infiltrated a supposedly secure German command post and captured documents containing details about German radar installations. Those documents helped the British understand German radar technology, which directly contributed to the success of future bombing raids. The Commandos didn't just hit targets, they gathered intelligence. Every raid had a secondary objective: learn something that would hurt the Germans later. After Vågsøy, Hitler personally ordered increased coastal defences across occupied Europe. He diverted tens of thousands of troops from the Eastern Front to guard against commando raids. Think about that. Small units of a few hundred commandos were tying down entire German divisions that could have been fighting the Soviets instead. But the raid that truly terrified the Germans was Saint-Nazaire in March 1942. The port of Saint-Nazaire in occupied France had the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast large enough to service the German battleship Tirpitz. If Tirpitz could use this dock for repairs, it would dominate the Atlantic and cut British supply lines. The British needed to destroy that dock. But it was 5 miles inland up a heavily defended estuary. Attacking it conventionally was impossible. So the Commandos came up with a plan so crazy it actually worked. They took an old destroyer, HMS Campbelltown, loaded it with tons of explosives disguised as extra fuel tanks, and rammed it directly into the dock gates. The explosives were on a delayed fuse. So after ramming the gates, the commandos aboard Campbelltown evacuated and joined other commandos who'd landed from smaller boats. The Germans thought the British had failed. The ship was stuck in the dock gates, but it hadn't exploded. German officers actually boarded the ship to inspect it. That's when the explosives detonated. 12 hours after impact. The blast killed hundreds of Germans, destroyed the dry dock completely, and ensured it couldn't be used for the rest of the war. Tirpitz never left Norwegian waters because it had nowhere safe to go for repairs. The cost was high. Out of 611 commandos and naval personnel involved, 169 were killed and 215 captured, but the strategic impact was enormous. And the Germans? They were horrified. The British had just sacrificed an entire ship and hundreds of men to destroy a single dock. What kind of enemy does that? After Saint-Nazaire, German soldiers started calling commandos the Devil's Brigade. Orders went out that commandos were to be shot on sight if captured, not treated as prisoners of war. Hitler was so rattled by commando raids that he issued the commando order in October 1942. It stated that all captured commandos were to be executed immediately, even if they tried to surrender. This was a war crime, a direct violation of the Geneva Convention. But Hitler was so desperate to stop the raids that he didn't care. The commando order actually backfired. Instead of intimidating commandos, it made them more determined. They knew they'd be executed if captured, so they fought even harder to complete missions and escape. And the raids continued. Norway, France, Italy, Greece, North Africa. Commandos hit German positions across occupied Europe. Each raid had multiple objectives: destroy infrastructure, gather intelligence, capture prisoners, create chaos, force the Germans to divert resources to coastal defence. But the biggest impact was psychological. German soldiers stationed in occupied territories lived in constant fear. They never knew when commandos would appear. A quiet night could turn into a nightmare in seconds. German commanders had to assume every coastal position was vulnerable. They couldn't predict targets. Commandos would hit heavily defended installations and ignore weaker positions because the heavily defended ones had more valuable targets. The uncertainty was maddening, and it got worse. By 1943, commando training techniques were being adopted across Allied special forces. The US Army Rangers trained with British commandos. The tactics refined at Aknakari became the blueprint for special operations units worldwide. When D-Day came in June 1944, commandos were among the first troops ashore. They secured key bridges, knocked out coastal batteries, and created chaos behind German lines. Their training, their tactics, and their absolute refusal to quit made them invaluable. Regular infantry would dig in when they hit resistance. Commandos would find another way around. After the war, German officers were interviewed about which Allied units they feared most. Soviet Guards divisions, American armoured units, British infantry. Overwhelmingly, they said British commandos. Not because commandos had the most firepower, but because they were unpredictable, ruthlessly efficient, and seemingly impossible to stop. One German general put it this way: fighting Russians was brutal but predictable. Fighting Americans was overwhelming but straightforward. Fighting commandos was like fighting ghosts who could kill you before you knew they were there. That's not just respect, that's fear. Today, every special operations unit in the world traces its lineage back to British commandos. The US Navy SEALs, Delta Force, SAS. Every modern special forces unit uses tactics and training methods pioneered at Aknakari. The British Commandos proved that small, highly trained units conducting unconventional operations could have strategic impact far beyond their numbers. They also proved that psychological warfare is just as important as firepower. The fear they created was as valuable as the targets they destroyed. So what can we learn from why Germans feared British Commandos? First, conventional wisdom isn't always right. Military experts said small raiding parties were useless in modern warfare. Churchill proved them wrong. Sometimes the crazy idea is actually brilliant. Second, quality beats quantity when properly applied. A few hundred highly trained commandos tied down thousands of German troops, not through direct combat, but through strategic targeting and psychological pressure. Third, unpredictability is a weapon. The Germans could prepare for massive invasions. They had doctrine for conventional warfare, but they never knew where commandos would strike next. That uncertainty was more damaging than predictable attacks. And finally, culture matters more than equipment. Commandos didn't have better weapons than German soldiers. They had better training, better selection, and a culture that emphasized mission completion over survival. That mindset made them nearly unstoppable and absolutely terrifying. British commandos weren't the biggest unit. They weren't the most heavily armed. They didn't fight in the most famous battles. But they changed how wars are fought. They proved that innovation, training, and psychological warfare could achieve what conventional forces couldn't. And they made the most powerful military in Europe afraid of the dark. If this story blew your mind like it blew mine, make sure you're subscribed to the channel because we're covering more incredible historical figures you've never heard of. And seriously, drop a comment below telling me what historical badass you want me to cover next. I'm reading every single one and taking notes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.